Right, good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to start my presentation, and the title is Redesigning a Final Year Course within a Teacher Education Program using the Tuning Africa methodology at a higher education institution. So just before I start on the outline, just a little bit of background information. Last year, in 2016, a group of colleagues and I, about 6 of us, did the Tuning Africa course. It was known as the Tuning Africa course. It was a competency-based course in which we were looking at the alignment of competencies within the course so that we can develop a program where everything is aligned. And there were about 6 of us. We all had different roles, and I was the coordinator. And so one of our tasks was to look at a course that we could redesign. And we chose a course that I happen to be teaching, which is a final year teacher education course. And it's involved in teaching practice, basically. So what students have to do within their final year of a 4-year course is they have to take the theory that they have, which we teach throughout the course, take it to schools and practice. Use the theory, use it and practice within a classroom, an authentic environment. So basically the way I'm going to look at develop this presentation is through this outline. First, I'm going to set the scene, because in South Africa we have quite a unique teacher education system, because it's developed over time since the abolition of apartheid in 1994. Then I'm going to look at things that we did to actually develop the course, the program competencies and how we revised the course, and also a large part of our journey. There were many challenges, strengths and weaknesses, and I would just like to allude to those, just talk about it for a while. Now, the course that we're looking at is, like I said, a final year course. It's set within a B.Ed or Bachelor of Education course, and it's throughout the whole course consists of 360 credits. And to get to the 4th year, you have to complete EDC, Education Practice 1, 2, 3, and 4, each allocated a different amount of credits. But now you can see with this course, about 60 credits, or at least 60 credits are accumulated at this level. But the importance of the course is that as you move along, half of the credits is allocated with EDC 401. It's a core course, which means that every student has to pass the course in order to progress. So in other words, if you can't perform at schools, then it means that you cannot be a teacher. You can repeat the course, but you need to then go through the whole course again from the beginning of the year to the end. We normally start off, we normally start off with about, in our first year, we start off with about 500 students. And by the end of the EDC 401 course, we have about 250. So there is a bit of student attrition along the way. And we're going to discuss some of those things as we move through the presentation. So you can see how the credits are allocated. Half of the credits are situated within EDC 401. Now, students go on teaching practice within that year for about 9 weeks. So you can argue that we only really see them for 6 months of the year, which is very, very little time at that point. We prepare them for grades 7 to 9, which are children from about age 13 to about 15 years. And here in the table, you can see just how many students. We start off, like I said, in first year with about even 1,500. By the end, we have about 250 students, right? Every year for each of the first, second, third, and fourth year, there's about 120 credits per course. Now, very importantly, we have to look at the profile of the type of student that we take in at UWC. The UWC has a strategic plan for teaching and learning. And from that documents, they did a bit of research, and the evidence suggests that many of the students that we take in come from working class backgrounds. It's very likely that they come from disadvantaged communities. One might argue that early on in their schooling, that throughout their schooling up until the last year, which we call their matriculation year or grade 12 year, they was exposed to inferior education. So when they come to us, there's an argument that you could say that they need additional support when they come. Now, we do have a 5-year B.Ed program also, which means that the first year runs over 2 years, which is like a bridging program. And we do take in students, particularly need a lot of help during that time within first years to do it over the period of 2 years. So the majority of our students come in underprepared, one might argue. On the other hand, we as staff members, we get there with our PhDs, and very seldom are we actually prepared to take on the responsibility of, it's a huge responsibility, not only academically, but also emotionally to support the students. So we also, are we appropriately trained to cope with the students' needs? And therefore, a systemic approach has to be taken in order to address these challenges. Right? But now, when we say we have challenges, it isn't only the staff that's a problem, the students that's a problem. There are different levels of challenges. And like I said, the legacy of apartheid still affecting our schooling, still students coming in. So apartheid is gone, but the legacy is still there. Within our faculty, with massification of education, we are taking in more students. So in other words, access is open to more students, which means that more students are exposed to our courses. But then within that, many students, is a lot more variety of needs. And that's something we have to take into account. We've also, at this point, had multiple changes in our curriculum. Not the university, the school curriculum. So when we train our students, that also impacts. So since 1994, we had about 3 changes in curriculum. With our teacher education in the university, we did have a previous curriculum, but it wasn't structured enough. And what they did was they changed the curriculum to make it more structured, but also to take into account the needs of the students. At the program level, like I said, in a first year, we're sitting with 500 students. So you've got one lecturer teaching 500 of them, each with diverse needs. So there's hardly any one-on-one engagement with the students. What I must say, we do have an online platform that guides and helps our students, but sometimes infusing technology even too soon, giving them that independence to learn on their own too early is also maybe not good for them. And also, to a certain extent, resources. We don't have all the resources available for 500 students. Okay, one might argue that there aren't that much resources available. Another important point is that many students are first generation university students. So when access opened up, many more students came in. They come into university, but sometimes they lack the support at home. So parents, etc., are not involved in their education. So, like I said earlier, we started with about 1,500 students in first year and 250 at the end. So you can see that there are multiple reasons, contextual reasons for students actually falling out of the system. So one of the solutions from the UWC Strategic Plan is that we constructively align our courses, right? And so the UWC was very proactive in training staff members into doing things around constructive alignment. But most often we'd get to do these courses and it would take about 3 days. And then we expected to go to our own courses and implement it. I did take part when I just got there in one of these 3-day seminars, one might argue. And I was very interested in it because I thought it was fascinating. So that's kind of sparked my interest. But when we did the Tuning Africa course, I realized that, wow, this is what people have been doing, because I read up more about it. I know they're doing a lot of it in other countries. I know Australia and in the rest of in Europe. But I could never, there's a difference between reading it and actually doing it. So I became interested, but when we did the Tuning Africa course, it actually really inspired me. And that's how I became very interested in wanting to develop my course using constructive alignment. So the first thing we had to do was think about the 3 levels of importance. We had to look at merging competences at 3 levels. So it was basically our national curriculum, the university's graduate attributes, and our faculty competences. So that in itself was a big task, because what we thought was 3 different things, actually when we looked at it closely, we realized that there was some overlap, and that helped a bit. So these 3 did tend to overlap, but it was important that each of them were represented within the development of our course, because it would be a way of addressing what was required to help our students reach a level we wanted them to be and produce a student that we would call a UWC holistic student. So the first was that I'm going to talk about is the national curriculum. We call it MRTEQ, the minimum requirements for teacher education qualification. And MRTEQ challenges us as teacher educators to think about the critical challenges that we face in education with regard to our students. So the dysfunctional schooling system that I spoke about earlier. Very importantly, there's been many arguments in the South African literature about, before pre-1994, we had different education systems and different teacher education programs to train teachers. So there were multiple curricula. And there was a curriculum for black students, curriculum for white students, curriculum, etc. The argument was that in the past we had what they call Bantu education. And the argument was that teachers were trained for Bantu education, which means that there was a lower level of education for a certain group of students. So what the curriculum, the Mr. Tech tried to emphasize that we change this, that this poor content and conceptual knowledge that teachers had to change. So we needed to look at developing teachers as an end product with high conceptual knowledge and more context driven, thinking more within a context, applying knowledge within a context. So we needed to change that. We needed to look at contextual variability, and we needed to look at preparing students from diverse backgrounds. The graduate attributes, on the other hand, now this is each university has to specify their own graduate attributes. And there's been many arguments that, look, the graduate attributes, we're preparing them for what the world of work, what companies want. You know, should we be doing that? Shouldn't we just be developing students with a good knowledge base? But we needed to also develop students that were employable. So having a whole bunch, a lot of knowledge is helpful, but we also needed to guide students toward developing skills so that when they get out into the world, they're able to use the skills appropriately. So the graduate attributes had to be aligned and embedded at all levels within the curriculum. And that's what our university emphasized. So the Mr. Tech then, there were about 11 competences that they wanted a beginner teacher to have. So what we as a group did, we looked at the competences and we looked at some overlap. And then we came up with 8 important competences that we could associate with Mr. Tech. Graduate attributes, there were 6 graduate attributes, right? And some of these, though it might have been worded differently, they did match the graduate attributes, right? Now, our faculty competences also matched both the graduate attributes and the Mr. Tech competences. But I just want to point out a very important theoretical perspective, and I think that's what I struggled with a lot in the course, because I tried to look at the course from the perspective of, yes, we have all these competences, but what is actually guiding the format of the course? Because we need to also think about what literature and what theories are guiding our development. How are we being informed? Now, one very important thing is that there are 3 important, I don't know if we could even call it theories, but ways of looking at how we could format our course for our students. And there's been a large body of research on how the student teachers learn. And the first thing we had to look at is, within our course, we got this group of students who come in with a certain level of education. Now, there's this one apprenticeship of observation. So students come into a program with preconceived ideas about teaching. And this needs to be addressed in the program. So why is this so important? Before you go into you start university or you start a program, you already have preconceived ideas about what you think teaching is because you come from a school background. So when you watch a teacher, you in some ways think, oh, I know how to teach, it's easy. But we don't see the product. Like, for instance, if you look at, let's think about an example of a PhD. When you hand in your PhD, you have this beautifully written thesis. But nobody knows what actually went into. So if I give you my thesis and you're a beginner student, you'll say, oh, no, this is fine. I can write it in this way. But the actual background information and things that you did to get to that point is invisible. So the apprenticeship of observation is, we almost need to kind of, within our course, wash away all of what students, but not everything, all of what the kind of preconceived ideas they had, and then almost, even if I can say it a little bit of crudely, pump them with a lot of theory so that they can have different ways of looking at education. They could say there's that way, but then there's also these. This is why I'm doing what I'm doing. The issue of enactment. So here students actually have to go into the class and do and teach. But we want to encourage them not to just do. We want them to use the knowledge that they have and translate or shape that knowledge so that it can change into helping a learner learn. Not just say, oh, I have all these beautiful ideas, I can do this and the other. We want them to understand what they're doing, right? And then there's the issue of metacognitive thinking. So we want to develop reflective teachers, teachers that can think about what they're doing. So thinking about your thinking. So in other words, we want them to go into a class thinking, many of them go in saying, I've got this wonderful lesson plan. Everything will go smoothly and everything will work out perfect. But we know ourselves, for instance, when we do a workshop, a lecture, etc., there's always that thing that happens in between and we change things. So we think on our feet and we have to change things to make it work for the context. So we want students to reflect on what they do so that throughout the course we have to then develop a course where we can give them the tools so that they can understand what they're doing within a complex situation. Right? So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to first distantiate themselves from how they thought about teaching, give them a lot of theories, take the knowledge, when you go to schools, enact it, and then when you do enact it, realize that there's not always a perfect way of doing things. If I did make a mistake or if things didn't work out here, I can think about it and rethink it and try it again, right? So what we try to then do is match the graduate attributes to the Mr. Tech, and we found that there were matches. What we did realize is that we need to put in our own flavor, that is the faculty, teacher education flavor, as additional competences to help to almost kind of give our students our stamp of approval. So this is the kind of students our faculty wants to produce. So like I said, the process of developing the competences was reflection, concept mapping, developing patterns and themes, alignment. The very difficult one here was the selection of the mix of competences. Now there's many that you can actually use, but recontextualizing it for our group of students and for providing the right mix where all of us agreed on the mix. That was the difficult part. So we developed competences with the 2 additional competences that we wanted to look at. Then what was important, that this was a final year course, and like I said, when they reach me, EDC 401, where I start teaching, I would like them at this point to have developed in a way where at this point I can present them with case studies, I can present them with discussions, etc. But I want them to theorize, reflect, generate, and apply knowledge. I don't want to be standing in front of them giving them recipes of this is what we're going to do in the classroom. Because if I'm going to be doing that, then I would be thinking that they're not at the level where they're supposed to be at this point. And that means that the previous 3 years, we forgot to teach them something for them to reach this level. So I want them to be at the highest level, at quite a high level of, in terms of their higher order thinking skills. And we have to specify the verbs to help them do this. Now, through the Tuning Africa, we were able to I just wanted to give this as a small example of how this was a competence, applies practical communication principles, and then basically write down everything that we wanted them to do in class, right? And outside of the class. And these are different activities, the resources that we'd use, the time periods, and what we would be doing, and possibilities of assessment. So there was a lot of reflection and thinking about how we're going to actually, and recording, because everything it has to be recorded if you're going to work in with a group of people. We tried to steer away from teaching and learning activities that were dominated with surface approaches, like, you know, we wanted them to look deeper into what they were doing in this case. So if we give them a case study, we want them to theoretically analyze and give them the tools for what they're doing. So the types of activities that we would want to do in the classroom would be tutorials, practicals. We do a lot of micro teaching, which is we let them set up a small group presentation. They have to pretend that they're in a classroom situation and develop a lesson within 20 minutes with a lesson plan, etc. And case studies, self-directed studies, etc. Our assessments, now this was a very difficult part because we also wanted them to reflect, apply, etc. But we had to limit our assessments. So our assessments tasks were mainly in the form of lesson plans, reflective journals, because remember we said we wanted them to be metacognitive, portfolios. We wanted a portfolio is a compilation, it's a file with a compilation of the activities that they did in the school, and they have to select what best represents their style of teaching. And then they would get a professional development mark also. Now, what I haven't spoken about, and I'm not going to go into too much detail with that, is that when our students, they do a theory part, that's where I lecture them. So they in class, and then they do, so they're learning in class, and then they're learning out of class also. That's when they go on their practice. But when they go on their practice, they are assigned a university tutor, and they go and visit them. And here's where they would mark all of these, the professional development mark, portfolios, etc. And the teacher at the school, which we normally call the mentor, they would also mark them. So they'd get these 2 marks when combined. And like I said, the assessment marks, these are the lesson plans, reflective journals, portfolios, etc. And this is how we basically, as I explained earlier, wanted to use them. So setting it out, we basically took the graduate attributes, what were the outcomes we wanted, the activities, here's all the assessment, the lesson plans, the professional development mark, the reflective journals, the pieces, and the portfolios. Then we had to select for each competence, what would we want them to be assessed on. So for subject and pedagogical content, we would look at their lesson plans, and then we wouldn't apply these. Interpersonal, social, and contextual things, we would look at the reflective journal, etc. So there would be a reason for why they did what they did, and we would map it across all of the levels. So these were for the competences that we developed. And then at the end, this would then be the assessment. And I just gave an example of weightings and examples of when they had to submit. But at this point, they're able to see what they need to do, how they need to do it, etc. And importantly, in my course, it would be important for the other lecturers to see what I do practically so that they can also guide them in their own method classes. So the alignment it helped us develop a holistic student. It gave us a sense of, within the first 2 years, we'd give them a lot of theory, and in the last 2 years, we'd let them practice more, distantiating them from the negative experiences that they had in the past in the education. It would help us shape the course of the program, and it also helped us develop the development of the students. It would also give us a sense of what kind of students we're going to develop through the alignment. And we really, South Africa has importantly in our history that we are in the moment, we need good teachers to educate our students. So this is a start. The challenges, like I said, recontextualizing, choosing the options of what we're going to teach and what we're going to learn, and knowing that the combination that we choose is for optimal learning. That was very difficult. Like I said, as I spoke earlier, there were many benefits at the university, the department, the program, but more particularly for the students. Many students come into the program and they need to be supported, but they also need to be supported throughout the program. When sometimes we have our 2-year foundation program, after the 2 years, they have to go into mainstream, and sometimes the students need that additional support. And I think through alignment and through careful guidance, where we all know as a faculty what we're doing, it would definitely help them. One of the important challenges, and I think one that stood out for me the most, was the getting all the staff on board and communication. I find that it's very difficult for us to communicate. But I found that through the Tuning Africa course, where we took a group of people and we made the decisions within, and each of the people were in a particular department and they fed back information to their department. I think strategically that did help a bit. And given our huge workloads, more students, etc., you could see it takes a lot of time to do this. So just fitting in the time within all of that to do that, it's difficult. But it helped us a lot. I found that the Tuning Africa course actually gave us a structure, and it wasn't a once-off 3-day workshop. It was a course that helped us along the way. Right, thank you. So those were my thoughts, my presentation. Thank you very much.